I'm Rossdude, and welcome to another episode of Rossdude Reads. I want to start today's episode by taking a little walk down memory lane. There I am, boy of hope, hanging out with my good friends. See, it even says good friends in the bottom right-hand corner. There was my best friend B, there was N, C, D, and M. It was M's birthday in this picture. So, N was one of those dudes who loved all things fantasy. He was into Magic the Gathering, Lord of the Rings, Heroes of Might and Magic 3, and Hero Quest. Dude had good tastes. One day, he got into Warhammer. Warhammer is an expensive tabletop war game where you buy miniatures, glue them together, and paint them. You also have to buy a super expensive codex for whatever army you decide to go with. N went with Dark Elves, also known as the Druchii. There was only one problem with this. N's mom was super religious. She found the passage in the Dark Elves Codex about the Witch Elves, scantily clad elvish women who dance in blood, make sacrifices, and do all sorts of blasphemous stuff. She Xeroxed the Witch Elves bio and sent it to all our parents to watch out for the evil armies in Warhammer. Ironically, it only made all of us more interested in the game and the lore. N had to change his army to the High Elves, but he convinced us, with the help of his mom's Witch Elf pamphlet, to play the game. B went with Bretonia, C went with Wood Elves, D went with bizarro choice of Chaos Dwarves, and M, actually, I don't think M bought into the fad. His parents lucked out. I was torn between the lizard men and the undead. The lizard men rode on the backs of dinosaurs and were led by giant toad wizards. And the undead just looked metal as all hell. The artwork for those codec back then were righteous. Eventually, I chose lizardmen. They were a safe bet. Not too evil looking like the undead, but also not too goody-goody either. My younger brother, also known as Weed Rich 420, not pictured in the photo, went with orcs and goblins. Between the six of us, I don't think we ever understood the rules or even painted all of our armies. We did, however, put a good dent in our parents' wallets. Man, I loved that Lizardmen Codex. It presented the fascinating story of this weird, ancient species. I loved it. I loved it more than the game itself. Unlike the game's rules, the stories were easy for me to understand, and I was able to depict these battles in my mind's eye with ease, rather than arguing with my friends over the rules. I never forgot about the amazing Undead Codex cover, though. It haunted my mind. Even if I wasn't playing as the undead, I wanted to know more about them. That Christmas, Santa delivered the Undead Codex. Thanks, Saint Nick. You clever old prankster, you. The Undead Codex was a marvelous tome filled to the brim with the horrifying tales of vampires, ghouls, liches, necromancers, and all other manners of disgusting living dead fiends. A key part of interest was the origin of the supreme lord of the undead, Nagash. Nagash learned the dark arts from some dark elf captives. He took their magic and corrupted it even further, turning it into the sickening practice of necromancy. If my memory serves me correctly, this bio only went on for a page or two, but it completely captured my imagination. The fad of Warhammer didn't last long in my circle, but over the years I've returned to Warhammer just to see what is going on. Hell, 10 years ago I bought a Warhammer 40k starter set, even painted a full platoon of Space Marines and Orcs. Though most of the starter set remains unassembled and unpainted, this is way further than I got in my youth. I also watched the official, though low-budget, 40k Ultramarines movie, and I played through the Space Marine game on the PS3. A great game, I might add. I even streamed Space Hulk Deathwing and look forward to jumping back into that game. For Christmas this year, Santa brought me this badass Todd McFarlane Ultramarine action figure. Thanks again, Saint Nick. It wasn't until recently that I was browsing Amazon for a solid dark fantasy book to read when I came across Warhammer Chronicles, The Rise of Nagash. It's an omnibus of the Nagash trilogy. Nagash the Sorcerer, Nagash the Unbroken, and Nagash the Immortal, all written by Mike Lee. It follows the classic Warhammer canon, which I guess has been kind of messed up due to a recent Warhammer update called the Age of Sigmar. I don't know much about Sigmar, but people say it sucks. Does the book live up to my nostalgia-crusted memory of the Undead Codex? It's the first book in the collection, Nagash the Sorcerer. First off, just take a look at the print. Damn, dude. It's so small, you have to put a magnifying glass to it just to read it. Nekahara, a land far to the south in the Warhammer realm, is home to many city-states, one of the most prominent being Khemri, the city of life. The priest king of Khemri, Ketep, is slain in battle by mysterious means. His second son, Thutep, is destined to inherit the throne, while his firstborn, Nagash, is destined to live his life as the grand hierophant of the Lich priests in Khemri's mortuary cult. Nagash resents this fate. It is the same fate that all of Nekahara's firstborn nobles must endure, a living sacrifice to the gods. During the mummification of King Ketep, Nagash discovers that his father's insides are completely fused. He wonders what could have done this. At the celebration of Thutep's ascension, ambassadors from Zandri, the city-state that recently won the battle resulting in Ketep's death, offer a peace-bearing gift, a trio of strange foreigners who call themselves the Druchi, also known as Dark Elves, who shipwrecked on Nekahara's shores and were enslaved. Nagash senses a magic aurora around these strangers, realizes that it must have been their talents that killed his father, and instead of sacrificing them to the gods, he imprisons them deep in the catacombs of Ketep's Great Pyramid and forces them to instruct him in dark magic. There, Nagash studies, experiments, and documents his research. He mixes the practices of the mortuary cult with the dark magic of the Druchi and creates necromancy, twisted magic that can bring corpses to life and make people immortal. Driven by hatred and greed, Nagash begins to hatch plans not only to usurp his brother for the throne of Khemri, but to also overthrow the gods of Nekahara. This book doesn't really take a linear approach to its storytelling. It opts instead to jump back and forth from when Nagash is crafting necromancy and plotting his takeover to when Nagash is leading his unholy armies against the other city-states of Nekahara. This works to the book's advantage since nearly every chapter ends on a cliffhanger. Not only do you want to read the next chapter to continue the story from 2 chapters ago, but you also want to read it so that you can get to the next chapter to see where the previous chapter's events lead. Brilliant. Really. It also helps that the writing is solid, hard-hitting, gut-wrenching, pulpy goodness. Mike Lee blows it out of the water. Nagash the Sorcerer is almost a perfect blend of horror, fantasy, military, tactical, and ancient politics. It has some truly terrifying moments when Nagash is experimenting with his grotesque necromancy on innocent people he kidnapped right off the street. The armies of the undead are just as horrific, as their ranks are made up not only of slain warriors, but also of recently deceased women and children. The way Lee describes these undead ambushes is almost stress-inducing. The details about how these monstrosities look, how they smell, how they behave is all on point, and the psychological effects they have on their mortal foes ranges from panicked to heartbreaking. One soldier embraces his family only to be torn apart by them, for they have long since become zombies of Nagash's horde. All of the horrors of war are on display in this novel. Supply shortages, fatigue, disease, distrust, it's all here. And they lend this book a sort of quality that I feel you wouldn't expect from a novel labeled with the Warhammer brand. The blood, the steel, the sand of the desert, the heat of the beating sun, the froth from the exhausted horses' mouths. It is all so vivid and reminds me of the details you would find in a Robert E. Howard yarn. The leaders of the city-states are constantly discussing plans of war in regard to manpower, geography, and resources. And for every plan they put together, Nagash has a counter plan. And sometimes they have a counter plan, and it can get really nuts and awesome. Of course, there are plenty of fantasy aspects. This is Warhammer, after all. There is magic and spiritual rituals that call forth sensational powers. It is not subtle with its magic use. Nagash utilizes a horde of magic scarabs to block out the sun so that his proto-vampire generals can take part in the battle freely. He can raise the dead, grant his commanders super strength and immortality, unleash plagues that turn men into ghouls and suck the souls out of living beings. He uses a super pyramid constructed out of black marble with the bodies of the slaves who worked on it built into the walls to amplify the waves of magic that come out of the north. The priests of the city-states call upon their gods for their powers. They can summon forth magic barriers, sandstorms, light, and heal wounds. One of the city-states even combines the power of the gods with their technology to create massive airships and even giant mechs. Every city-state has their variant of the Ushabti, statues carved from the likeness of the Nekahara gods and brought to life through divine powers. The politics is in there a little bit. There is plotting and backstabbing and wife stealing. There is diplomacy. But there isn't so much that it slows the story down. This novel really is like a roller coaster from start to finish. And like a roller coaster, there are moments that made my stomach queasy. It is a very grim book. Dark fantasy hits it right on the nose. There are so many moments where it feels absolutely hopeless for the characters who you come to like. The book ultimately is about Nagash, hence the title, but Nagash most certainly is the villain. It is very hard to sympathize with him at all. Not that he isn't interesting, but he is evil to the core. You could argue that his brother, Theotep, is a soft ruler and that his policies led Khemri to decline, but that isn't why Nagash usurps him. Nagash doesn't really care about Khemri. He just wants to conquer all of Nekahara and destroy the gods. He commits horrible and downright despicable acts in his efforts to accomplish this. One of his generals, Arkin the Black, has some sympathetic aspects. Being the lowest of his low, noble family with no real future prospects, Arkin throws in with Nagash only to find that Nagash is ruthless even towards him, and so he seeks to start his own offshoot of Nagash's undead army. But even so, Arkin is a bad dude. He slays innocent women and children without remorse, and shady tactics are not off the table for this guy. The heroes of this novel are the priest kings Arkmenhotep of Kasabar, Hekmenukep of Libris, and Rak-Am-Hotep of Restra. Perhaps, had I read this novel in my edgelord-laden youth, I could have made myself root for Nagash and his sickening crusade across Nekahara. But as an adult, I can't help but cheer on the priest kings. The reader truly understands their plight and their desperate struggle against the evil that threatens their land and their families.
This book is pretty freaking rad. It satisfies the horror junkie, the war tactics nut, the fantasy nerd, and the weebs who love ancient Egyptian themes. It never lets up. The heroes are constantly in peril, and though it leaves room for a sequel, the conclusion is satisfying. Nagash himself is an unrelatable monster, and I wish there was a little bit more to him, but this barely hurts the novel. If the quality of the other Warhammer Chronicle books are anywhere near the caliber of this novel, then I need to invest in them as soon as I finish the other two Nagash books. In other words, I recommend it.
All right, ladies and gents, we're going into the summary. Here there be spoilers. Continue at your own peril. If you haven't read this novel yet and want to, cast a lightning spell on your computer and use some of that dark necromancy to revive your long-dead wallet and purchase this fine piece of literature. In between learning the dark arts from the Druchi, Nagash sets out to recruit his conspirators who will help him secure his power. He picks low nobles who have given up any chance at prosperity in their life. Nobles with tainted reputations and destructive habits. Arkin the Black is amongst them. They supply Nagash with information and victims to be guinea pigs for his experiments. And through Nagash's influence, they take up high-ranking positions in Theotep's government and poise themselves for Nagash's takeover. After Nagash masters his craft, he puts it to the test by battling the very same Druchi who taught him. He is victorious. Shortly after the battle, Nagash's allies accidentally kidnap a servant girl of the palace for Nagash's experiments. Homeless and poor people is one thing. No one will notice their disappearance, at least right away. But a palace servant? that would raise eyebrows. Sure enough, Thuotep tracks down Nagash, and in a brief confrontation, Thuotep appears to have the upper hand. But Nagash uses magic to freeze Thuotep and bury him alive in the pyramid catacombs. Against Nekahara tradition and the will of the gods, Nagash takes Thuotep's queen, Nephirim of Lamia, as his wife. He declares himself king of Khemri and murders Thuotep's and Nephirim's son. A potion made with her son's blood is what Nagash tricks Nephirim into drinking in order to make her immortal and a slave to Nagash's will. For many years, Nagash rules with an iron fist. Some city-states fall in line, but others cannot accept Nagash's sacrilege. Kasabar, Labaris, and Restra, as well as some smaller city-states, launch a massive military campaign to rid the world of Nagash and free Khemri from his tyrannical rule. They are met by the necromancer's unholy forces, a mix of living soldiers pushed to the breaking point and the living dead. Ka-Sabar is the first to engage this fiendish army, and the victory goes to Nagash. Libaris and Restra join forces to battle Khemri. They have the advantage of knowing what evils Nagash possesses, but are still taken aback by the amount of heresy the Khemri forces are willing to deploy. Nothing is sacred to Nagash's generals. In the end, their unorthodox tactics push the allied city-states back. Oh yeah, on a side note, the Restra forces utilize lizardmen infantry. Yeah, boy! Reading that, it felt like running into a good friend you haven't seen in like 20 years. A few more years pass as both Nagash and the allied city-states lick their wounds and rebuild their forces. Eventually, the war kicks off again. My main man, Akhmenhotep, is defeated again, and as he retreats, his forces are beaten down by the harsh desert and harrying undead war parties. For the promise of immortal life and power over Ka-Sabar, Akhmenhotep's older brother betrays and murders him. It is a heartbreaking moment. Hekhmenukep and Rak-Amhotep are likewise pushed back in their battle with the dead. However, instead of pursuing them, Nagash decides to march on another city-state, Maharak, the city of priests. If Maharak falls, Nagash can claim his victory over the gods once and for all. Maharak survives the siege for a long while as the priests use their holy barrier and send out their powerful Ushapti, but eventually they run out of food, water, and strength. In a cruel twist of fate, Nagash realizes that his queen, Nephirim, is the living embodiment of the pact Nekaharans have with their gods. He sends Nephirim headlong into Maharak's barrier, where she disintegrates. The pact is broken, and the priests lose their ability to call forth divine powers. The barrier fades, and the forces of the undead seep into the city. All hope seems lost, but suddenly, Nagash's army is attacked from behind. It is Libaris and Restra in one last-ditch effort to defeat Nagash. Nagash's former living allies also turn on him. Arkan the Black makes a deal with the city-state Lamia, and they unleash their advanced weaponry on Nagash's forces. These dragging cannons are effective against the dead. Nagash's forces are scattered. His retreating generals make their way back to Nagash's evil pyramid in Khemri, only to be snuffed out, brought into the sunlight, and executed. From Nagash's own tomb, a swarm of scarabs escapes the pyramid and flies northward. Nagash is nowhere to be found. Arkan keeps his promise and leads the officials of Lamia to Nagash's secret study. There, the Lamians confiscate all of the text and backstab Arkan, taking him into custody. In the north, with dead scarabs all around him, the broken and battered Nagash rises as he is drawn to some unknown power.
And that concludes Nagash the Sorcerer. It's a brutal and bloody ride. Next time, I'll wrap up the first Aliens Expanded Universe trilogy with Aliens the Female War. Don't miss out. I'm Rossdude. Peace.